કરીમ સાહેબનું એટલો દિવસ પછી એટલો સાલ વર્ષ પછી આપણે મારો તો ઈચ્છા એ હતી કે આપણે ડાયરેક્ટ પ્રત્યક્ષ રૂબરૂ મળવા માટે પણ આ ખૂબ આનંદ આવે છે કે તમારું માર્ગદર્શક આપણે વર્ચ્યુઅલ પ્લેટફોર્મ જરીએ મળી રહે છે. તો આ બહુ સારું એન્ડ મને એવું લાગે કે બધા લોકો જો આ પ્રોગ્રામ જોઈ રહી છે તો આપણે બહુ ના કેવલ મજા આવે સાથે એકેડેમિકલી ઇનપુટ હું મળશે હું મારો વિનંતી. So to begin with, I think it's a 3 days workshop has already been completed. It was a special session which was designed and organized just to accommodate and just because we didn't want that academician who is renowned, such a scholar, both in the field of diaspora as well as media. And I think Ali, it would be maybe 7 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning in Canada. Despite the fact is, we can see the Professor Karim is ready and is close to our heart because we locate in Gandhinagar and he is from Ahmedabad. And I think at the topic which has been selected, like the Gujarati hybridity particularly, and I think this is of course need to be discussed upon, like how they have Gujarati or else the diasporas, they have established in the course of time, they could gain the popular and prominent space. That is evident also how much they would have been negotiated and the nature of negotiated in terms of cultural negotiation, identity negotiation, and also the concept of hybridity, how much it is fit into. Besides, as we would also love to see some few words from Professor Karim, because his book, though I have read many years before, Media of Diaspora, and also one article and couple of articles. One among the very popular articles, Ethnic Media, from Ethnic Media to Global Media. So, and the transnational communication networks. So he has been not only following, rather working on the transnational network of the diasporic community. So a learned scholar, a great scholar whom we have today in this special valedictory session on behalf of Center for Diaspora Studies and also on behalf of Central University of Gujarat, I extend a warm welcome to Professor Karim and Karim. And also I could see one of our senior faculty member from Jamia Millia Islamia, Professor Anishur Rahman sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Mahapatra sir. I was missing you.
And you always been there in our all conference and seminar and wherever we feel like. So it's a great opportunity to have you more and more. And I could see some scholars also, and Dr. Naresh Kumar, and especially I think Mr. Sudhavdin deserves a good round of applause because he has last 3 days he has been continuously working, and because it's a huge platform, the people have connected from different parts of the world as well as different parts of the country, and the sessions are over. And I hope in this special session also, and we would discuss and would listen to Professor Karim, and certainly some new areas and new scope will be in front of us, and we'll look forward and how best we can use those opportunities and transit into the research agendas in our future course of academic work. So with these words, I once again welcome Professor Karim, and finally I would say हमारा खूब आभार साहब and खूब स्वागत, अभिनंदन. Over to
sir.
I think one lady who is also sitting around. Yes.
No, sir. With your permission, I would like to read brief bio of Professor Karim, sir.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Uh, Good evening, everybody, and good morning to people from Canada and America and other.
So I have to ask your help again in terms of the presentation. So here I'm just looking for it. Okay, I think let's. Okay, are you able to see the slide?
No, it's not seen.
Okay.
It's coming.
Coming, sir.
It's there. It's there. The slides are there.
Okay. All right. I'm going to use PowerPoint because I thought I can show you some photographs and also you can follow through with the points. Even though, as mentioned earlier, my specialty, my particular interest in diaspora has been with respect to communication and media, I thought I would take this opportunity to display my research on the Gujarati community, of which I'm a member, but I'm looking at very critically with respect to their diaspora and their settlement. And so what happens with respect to adaptation after migration, and how hybridity plays a role in the transformation of a particular community. So I'll just give you an outline to begin with. So because it is a long presentation, which is going to cover a variety of issues, some of which may be difficult to follow, but hopefully this will enable you to get a broad picture, a large picture of what I'm going to cover. So I'll start with the topics, the concepts of migration, adaptation, and hybridity, and then move to pre-modern migration in the Indian context, the emergence of Satpanth, which is my case study, and Khoja Ismaili settlement in Africa, and then finally migration to Western countries. What I will do first is to go through a series of photographs, which is one way to show to you the trajectory of this migration. So before we do that, of course, the most famous Khoja member of this community in India is Azim Premji, whom many of you may have heard of. He's known as the Tsar of the Indian IT industry, and is also a philanthropist. So obviously the community is doing well in India and has people who are in diaspora as well. So with respect to a number of buildings, I'll show you three photographs of three buildings in three different countries to display to you how over time the migration has occurred and the kinds of buildings that are being built by this community. So the first one is here in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, or as Gujarati like to call it, Ahmedabad. And this is a building that was built in the 18th century and is used as a place of worship by the community. This is another place of worship which was built in 1920, so 100 years ago, in Kenya, in Nairobi. It was the Dar Khana, which was the national headquarters of the community. The really interesting aspect of this building is, first of all, its British architecture. So this was the time of colonialism, both in India and in Africa. And both countries were ruled by the British. So it is typically British. You will also recognize similar buildings in India. The other aspect of this is, where were the materials brought from? They were actually brought from Gujarat. The building is made of granite, which is from Porbandar, which is actually the port from which many Khojas left Gujarat to come to Africa. And the woodwork also is from Gujarat. Now, this is something completely different. This is a building that was built in 2010, 6 years ago in Toronto. It is also a place of worship, but built in a very postmodern style. So this gives you a sense of the kind of transformation that the community has been going through over 100 years. So now I will show you a series of photographs of people in India and in diaspora. And the photographs I have chosen are of people who have been senior functionaries in government or politicians. So here is Ismail Ganji, who was born in 1788, died in 1883, and he was the Wazir for the Nawab of Junagadh in Gujarat, quite famous. This is Pira Devji. He was a very close confidant of the Sultan of Zanzibar. So he had migrated from Gujarat to Zanzibar, where he became a very important person. Even had an opportunity to meet with Queen Victoria in England. This is Amir Jamal. He was a very important minister in the government of Tanzania. After Tanzania became independent, was ruled by an African president, an African government. This is Amir Bhatia, who is currently in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, Lord Bhatia. Mubina Jafar, a senator in Canada. Yasmin Ratansi, member of parliament in Canada.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. We are not able to see the images.
Okay. What would you suggest? Am I going too fast?
No, sir. We are not able to see the images, sir. Photos, slides.
Okay. Not sure. Can you see the PowerPoint itself?
We can only see the title page, sir.
Okay. Perhaps it's a problem of the software. What I will do is it is not something that I can fix right now, so I guess I will just have to continue. But just to sort of
continue, sir. No issue, because if it is
okay.
a problem, yeah, please continue.
Okay, so basically, I'm sorry that this is not working out as one would hope, but I guess technology is not perfect. I will just say a few words about what I'm trying to say here. Is that people have moved from one part of the world to another and have basically been able to be successful in settlement. Of course, becoming a politician is not easy in any country, especially in terms of being elected. You have to reach out to the local people, get their votes, and serve in government with all that that entails. And so this is a fairly small community in relative size, but has been successful in becoming at least, the few people who have become members of government in different countries demonstrates that there is something that has worked in diaspora. Mayor Nenshi is the first South Asian and the first Muslim to become a mayor of a major city in a Western country. He was elected about 10, 15 years ago and is serving still as the mayor of Calgary. Salma Lakhani was, actually she was appointed 2 days ago as the Lieutenant Governor of the province of Alberta in Canada. The appointment was made by Prime Minister Trudeau. So let's move on. So with respect to issues of research about migration and diaspora, and of course, the workshop is about methodology, I thought I would address some basic questions that have formed the framework of my research into issues of diaspora. So the basic thing that has really intrigued me is, why do human beings migrate? I'm not going to try and answer these questions here. You can, of course, read my work and the people of other work, but those people who are aspiring to study diaspora, perhaps this is something that needs to be kept in mind in terms of how we may, of course, begin to look at this issue, ask the very basic questions as to why does this happen? If people were happy in one place, why do they need to move from one place to another? It is very difficult. It means dislocation. It means separation from family and friends and the place that one grows up, the things that one is comfortable with. So these are issues to consider. Another question, how do migrants adapt then to their new location? They may not know the language, the customs, where to get help, how to settle down, how to find shelter, food, the basics of life, how to get an education, how to support your children, etc. And then, how is a diaspora formed? Now, people use this term very loosely sometimes. In my mind, a diaspora is formed when people from one country, of one culture, move to different parts of the world. A diaspora does not exist only in one country. It is, for me, it is the links between different parts of the world where a particular community may have settled. So that constitutes a diaspora, or the word comes from Greek, means scatterings, like the scattering of seeds in different parts of the world. What I've also found useful is to approach the study of diaspora in an interdisciplinary manner, rather than just looking at it through one lens, either sociology or history or anthropology, but combine as much as possible various approaches so that we can get a fuller picture of what is happening in diaspora. Now, it is very important to study diaspora as a human phenomenon. Of course, there are other aspects as well, culture and so on. But this is why I ask those questions. Why do human beings migrate? What is it in a human being that makes her migrate? The earliest archaeological findings of human existence and human migration are in Eastern Africa. Archaeologists and anthropologists have basically found that this is where the oldest skeletons of Homo sapiens have been found. And also the evidence of a large family in one line making a trek across the savanna in Africa. Their footprints have been found. So you can see that people have been moving in search of food, perhaps fleeing from danger, etc. And this is a phenomenon, a human phenomenon that has been occurring for a very, very long time. So this is a map, a very simple map that has tried to depict the movement of human beings, of Homo sapiens, from Africa to different parts of the world. So you can see the trajectory initially moving into the southern continents. People did not move, human beings did not move into Europe until 40,000 years ago, but they were populating other places like the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, even Australia, before they started going north, obviously because of the cold climate there. And in this movement, in this migration from Africa to all over the world, including the Americas, we have the formation of the human diaspora. We talk about the Indian diaspora or the Chinese diaspora or the African diaspora, but here is the formation of the human diaspora, how human beings have populated the entire world over many tens of thousands of years. And so with respect to arriving in the new societies and adapting to them, nowadays when people move, of course, there already are other people there. There are formations of society, of nations, of cities, etc. And one has to engage with the society that is already there. And so what is going to determine how easy it is or how difficult it is for a newcomer to integrate into the new society? Now, there are various points that I've put on this slide. It may depend on the group itself, its own historical, social, and cultural dynamics of the group, and how does its own culture enable it to engage with other groups? What sort of relationships does it have with other groups? Is it open to engaging with other groups? Are there certain things that they will not want to engage with other groups in, and so on? These are questions to be asked. On the other side, is the receiving society open to engaging with newcomers? Are they hostile to them? Are they receptive? These are important factors. Then for the group itself, how is it over time retaining its own customs, its language, its religion, its marriage patterns? Or is it adapting them? Is it changing them? There is the model of assimilation, completely perhaps losing all of your identity, your previous identity, or a lot of it, to accommodate yourself into the receiving culture. This may or may not happen. Now, I talked about the diaspora existing in different parts of the world. So this is one factor which may ensure that the diaspora existing in different parts may maintain its culture and language by interacting with other people of its diaspora in the world, as well as with the homeland. So these days, with the different communication technologies, including the internet, but also satellite TV and so on, people can watch, Indians around the world can watch television that is broadcast from India. They can communicate with people in India. They can communicate with people in other parts of the diaspora, the Indian diaspora. And this may help them maintain, if they choose to do so, their own culture and language. And last, but of course, this is not an entire list, but a few of the points that I'd like to make is, what does the leadership of the group think? How should the group interact with the local people? How should it accommodate itself, its own culture, its language in the new place? So the other issue that I'd like to talk about is hybridity. Now, with issues of identification, people have often thought of identification in a very essentialist way, that only certain kinds of identities are possible. For example, in culture, that you only have one culture, you only have one religion. In many parts of the world, especially in Europe, there was a tendency to think of nation states as having only one language. We know that is not so, especially in a place like India, but in many parts of the world. People have different kinds of identities, cultural, religious, linguistic, and so on. And sometimes through hybridity, there's a lot of interaction. A human being as an individual may participate in several cultures, may know several languages, and perhaps the most interesting of all, which I'm going to cover today, is religious identity. We think of religion as occupying, as a human being having only one religion. But of course, each individual is exposed to so many different kinds of ways of thinking. And even though he or she may think of himself or herself as belonging to one religion, unknowingly, perhaps, he or she may share ideas and beliefs from other religions that he or she may have come across. And this is sometimes called the third space, the liminal third space, where a lot of interaction is taking place in the mind of the person or in the culture in general for a group who is exposed to, which is exposed to a lot of influences, cultural, religious, ethnic, etc. So now that we are talking about Gujarat, what I'd like to do is to talk about the larger Indian context in terms of pre-modern migration, because no part of the world is static. There are people coming and going. And when we look at the earliest dating of Homo sapiens in India, remember I showed you that other map of the world in which people came out of Africa and went to different parts of the world. The earliest dating of Homo sapiens in India is supposed to be 100,000 years. Some people put it at 60,000 years ago. There is some debate and discussion on this. Aryan migration is supposed to have taken place 3,500 years ago. Indian faiths, the Hindu faith, the Buddhist faith, were found in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, 2,000 years ago, which shows to us that people from India then were moving outwards, traveling to different parts of the world and spreading their religions. Muslim migration into India began 1,300 years ago. Parsi migration 1,000 years ago. I'm just giving some examples. Of course, this is not the full picture, but it gives you a sense of the comings and goings of people in the subcontinent. Romani migration. Romani, you may have heard of the Roma people, or sometimes they're called the Gypsies. And that occurred from places like Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan, all the way into Europe and now around the world. But it began in India 500 years ago with people moving westwards. And of course, Europeans with Vasco da Gama also arrived in India around the same time. There was a thriving trade in which India was participating in the Indian Ocean. So we talked about the land movements, but these are the sea movements, which is now getting more and more pertinent to the Khoja case that I will talk about. And you can see how widely Indians traded in the Indian Ocean and beyond. Specifically with respect to Gujarat, Gujarati maritime trade was flourishing from the 14th century and perhaps even before that. Hindu traders were under the Muslim Sultan's protection. Of course, the Sultanate did not mind people trading as long as they contributed to the customs, contributed customs duties and made the Sultanate richer. The major ports were Kambat, Div, and Surat. And Gujarati traders largely traded westwards because they are on the western side of India, in the Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf, and Red Sea, but also ventured beyond that. So through this travel, they were trading in places like Iraq, or Iran, Iraq, Oman, Yemen, Arabia, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, East Africa, Mozambique, and Madagascar. So you can see how widely they were traveling. They were mostly using ships like these, Arab dhows, or some ships that were made in Gujarat itself. Let's talk about religion now in India at this time. So, whoops. Okay. So as many of you may know, from the 12th through the 16th century, there was great religious ferment in India. Many gurus, sants, babas, peers circulated in society. They belonged primarily to the Bhakti and Sufi movements, which were intermingling in themselves. People were not thinking of the particular religions that they belonged to, but they were more interested in the ideas of religion, of spirituality. These panths borrowed both from Vedic and Islamic traditions. For example, the Sikh tradition, which Guru Nanak helped establish, is an amalgamation of both these traditions. And it is interesting that when the Sikh holy book, Guru Granth Sahib, was being put together, Guru Nanak included the Sufi Saint Baba Farid's Shabads into this book. So there was a great interaction, which was very done between religions. There was this hybridity. And also with the Kabir Panth, founded by Kabir, the weaver, you can see how they look at the various divinities in Islam and in the Hindu faith. So Kabir said in one of his poems, Kabir is a child of Allah and Ram. They are his guru and peer. So this kind of hybridity was very common, and it led to the group that I'm going to be talking about. But let's move a little bit to the West in terms of the other influence that produced Satpanth. So in the Middle East, there was a group called Ad-Dawat al-Haq, the Invitation to Truth, which is now known as the Shia Ismaili movement. But they preferred at that time to call themselves the Invitation to Truth, Dawat al-Haq. They followed imams descended from the Prophet's son-in-law Ali, since they were Shia. And they have a very long history, which I won't go into. It's over 1,000 years long. But one of the highlights was when these imams were also caliphs. They built Cairo and they ruled a large empire from the 10th to the 12th centuries. So this lineage that comes from Ali continues to the present day. And the current Imam of the Nizari Ismailis is Aga Khan IV. There are many branches of this group, which I really don't have the time to go into. I'm just going to focus on the Khoja Ismailis. So the followers of the Aga Khan hold him to be the 49th in lineage from Ali and Fatima, the Prophet Muhammad's daughter. So with respect to the formation of Satpanth, between the 12th and the 15th centuries, the Imam in Persia sent peers to India, to Gujarat, Sindh, Punjab, and Rajasthan. These peers learned about the Indic religions, the cultures and languages, they sat with the sadhus and absorbed this knowledge. And then they preached to Indians in these various provinces that I mentioned, these places, about the Imams as the true guru. The Imam was living in Persia at this time. And they call their faith Satpanth, path of truth, which of course recalls a Dawat al-Haq, the invitation to truth. Their followers were named Khojas, which comes from the Persian Khwaja, and is the equivalent of the Indic Thakur. So you can see how they are engaging, if you see them as immigrants into India, how with respect to what I talked about earlier, adaptation, this was a form of very deep adaptation, immersing themselves into the Indic, the Vedic culture, the religion, and then teaching their own ideas, their own religious ideas through the Hindu concepts, as well as Hindu ways of knowing. So I don't know if you can see this map, but it's a map of India indicating the places where the peers were teaching, the peers of Satpanth in Punjab, Rajasthan, Sindh, Kutch, and Gujarat. So let's talk about this. Sorry?
Map is not visible.
Okay, again, I apologize about that. So let's move on to religious hybridity and pluralism. These peers, they composed poetry, which were hymns to be sung, called ginans. The word is supposed to come from the Sanskrit jnana, which refers to knowledge. And this is what they were trying to impart, religious knowledge through those ginans. They were composed in Gujarati, Khari Boli, which are, I understand, the precursors of Hindi and Urdu, Punjabi, Sindhi, and Multani. And they're still sung after all these years, after 700 years, in South Asia itself, among the Khojas, and in diaspora. So this is a daily occurrence. The Ginans drew on Indic religion and symbols, and this is how the peers were able to preach to people in India. Satpanth saw itself as a pluralist and universalist search for truth. And so just like Kabir, one of the Ginans says, both Ram and Rahman are the same. And this is the kind of pluralism, the hybridity that the peers upheld. The followers did not refer to themselves as Muslims or Hindus, or even as Ismailis, but they just called themselves Khojas or the Satpanthi Jamaat. The places of worship are still called Jamaat Khanas, where the Mukhi, which is of course a very Indian term, the Mukhi presides in these Jamaat Khanas. So the Imam eventually migrated to India in 1842. This was Aga Khan I. This was a title that was given to the Imam by the Qaja Shah in Iran. And he asserted his leadership now that he was in India for the first time. He asserted his leadership over the Khojas. Now, some of the Khojas did not like this, and they dissented and left the fold to become Sunnis or Shia Ithna Asharis, 12ers. The Imams themselves began moving their Indian followers towards a closer, what they saw as an Islamic identity. And I'll go into that further later. So let's talk about the migration to Africa. I mentioned the Gujarati maritime trade earlier. Khojas were very much part of this. They traded in earlier centuries and then began settling in East Africa in the early 1800s. They played a role in developing the region with other Indians and working also with Africans and the European colonial masters later. The society was racially structured under European colonialism. So Europeans were at the top, then the Indians, and then finally the Africans. There was a lot of discrimination. There was a lot of there were barriers in terms of what sort of an education people of different backgrounds could get, what sort of services, where they could get health care, what social places they could frequent, and so on. And Indians were forced to be part of this. And unfortunately, they also participated in discriminating against the Africans under this system. The Aga Khan saw that his followers as Indians were being discriminated, were being disadvantaged in this colonial system. And so he advised his followers to adopt European customs, to appear, to dress like Europeans, to talk like Europeans in English, to understand their literature, their culture, etc. And so even the Aga Khan schools began increasingly to focus on English, on British culture, and on European ways. This meant that links to Indian roots grew weaker. Gujarati or other Indian languages were not taught in the Khoja schools, which of course was a loss. Let's move on further west. We have very little information about the early migration of Khojas to Western countries. One person that we do know about, although not a lot, but his name was Hussein Rahim. He had traveled from Gujarat initially to Japan, where records show that he also used the name Chhagan Karaj Verma or Shagan Lal. And he finally arrived in Canada in 1910, where he became a very prominent fighter for the rights of Indians in Vancouver. Aga Khan III encouraged his followers in India and in East Africa and in other parts of Africa to obtain higher education in Europe. So individual Ismailis began to study there, and some of them settled down. And this began to occur in around the 1930s. One of the earliest to travel from Zanzibar to England was the father of the famous actor, the Hollywood actor, the British actor, Krishna Pandit Bhanji, who's also known as Ben Kingsley. And some of you may recall him playing the role of Mahatma Gandhi in David Attenborough's famous movie, the 1980s movie called Gandhi. And so he was himself of Khoja background, of Gujarati background. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that several Western countries had racial barriers to immigration. So Asians, Africans, Latin Americans could not immigrate to Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, etc., and other parts of Europe. And it was only until the 1960s that they began to be allowed to travel to these places and settle there. Now, a very significant event occurred in 1972 with the expulsion of South Asians, of Indians and other South Asians from Uganda. They'd become citizens, many of them, in Uganda, as the, other Indians had also become citizens in Kenya, Tanzania, Congo, etc., wherever they had traveled to and lived in Africa. Nevertheless, the military president, Idi Amin, expelled all South Asians whom he saw as exploiters of the Ugandan economy and basically wanted to Africanize his country. So he expelled Indians and other South Asians, and they'd become stateless overnight, and they were looking for places to go to. So several countries took them in. The largest number of people went to Britain. About 6,000 came to Canada. India also took some. Kenya took some as well. And so there was this outflow of people from East Africa in a major way to Western countries for the first time. So the way that diaspora works, the way that migration works is that once there is a community in a particular country, other people are encouraged to go there. So the growth of a small community of Khojas in Britain and in Canada encouraged other people, other Khojas in Africa, who felt that their countries, their African countries, were politically and economically unstable, places like Tanzania, Kenya, Congo, etc., people from there began to migrate then to Western countries. So the major settlements now are in Canada, United States, Britain, Portugal, France, and some other places. Now, I've been speaking about the migration of Khojas from India to Africa and then to Europe or North America. But currently, there are significant numbers of Khojas who are migrating directly from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh to these countries, to Western countries. Ismailis from other places like Afghanistan, Iran, Tajikistan, and Syria are also migrating to Western countries. Now, most Khojas had never met other members of the followers of the Aga Khan who were living in all these countries, and for the first time, they're interacting with them. So now you have a transnational community over which the Aga Khans, in which the Aga Khans have followers. And so what the Imams have done is that they have established a transnational network of Ismaili national councils in 25 countries. Countries in places like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, in Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Congo, Mauritius, actually, sorry, not Mauritius, but Madagascar, in Europe, in the UK, in France, in Portugal, in the United States, Canada, etc. So a total of 25 countries, but Ismailis, of course, live in other places as well, including Syria, Afghanistan, Tajikistan. There are councils there too, and Iran. And governing the work of these councils in these different places is a transnational constitution, which has been promulgated by Aga Khan IV in 1986. So the councils seek to meet the community's educational, health, economic, and social welfare needs in these various countries. So in places like India, there would also be a housing society, which would provide housing for the people in their community who need it. These structures are present in most countries of the major Ismaili presence, and self-governance is done on the basis of voluntary service. There are a few paid people, but otherwise most of the presidents and the committee members and the board members are doing it in a voluntary way. And of course, many of the Khojas refer to this with a Gujarati word, seva. Now, coming back to the issue of hybridity, we can see that hybridity has transformed the Khojas in multiple ways. Religiously, through the intersections of Islamic and Vedic elements. Culturally, through the intersections of so many cultures, Indian, Middle Eastern, Central Asian, African, and others. So they are engaging with people from different parts of the world who are members of their Jamaat in these Western places, whom they are meeting for the first time. And this is having an impact on them with respect to how their culture is changing as well. And of course, Western culture as a constant presence also affects how they view the world. Now, it is rather sad that Khoja culture itself and religious traditions are under-researched in the institutions of the group. And this is something that needs to be addressed. Most emphasis is placed on the Arab and Persian history and literature of the group. And now I'd like to move on to what I see as the paradox of pluralism. So pluralism is an important theme in the Imam's discourse of the Aga Khan IV. Well, this is certainly important because his followers are in a minority in the countries wherever they live. not only in India or Africa, but also in the different parts of the Middle East. In Iran, in Syria, in Afghanistan, Tajikistan, they are minorities where they have lived for hundreds of years. So pluralism addresses the idea of people living together in harmony, in peace, respecting each other's differences, but of course, living as citizens of that country. Pluralism also addresses his own community's internal diversity. Now that especially in places like Canada and United States, Ismailis are coming in from different parts of the world, from the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, etc. He's encouraging them to recognize each other's difference and to work together in harmony. As it turns out, because the Khojas, especially those in East Africa, who were told to adopt European ways, to get European education, etc., they have really benefited over time, over generations, through this advice. And so they have become economically and politically predominant among all the other Ismailis. They are the ones who are running the various institutions of the Aga Khan in the Aga Khan Development Network. They are the ones who are the most wealthy, the most connected. And of course, unfortunately, you don't see those photographs, but they've also become leaders in places like Canada and the UK and so on. But some traditions are curtailed because these Khoja traditions, because they are being seen as too Hindu, which is, of course, not really true. Because, as I explained earlier, the peers did not see themselves as Hindu or Muslim. They just saw themselves as a pluralist, universalizing search for truth. That's what they were promoting. And they were borrowing from different cultures, different religious points of view to enable their followers to understand what is the most important thing in spiritual search. So this is something that the community is trying to come to terms with. Additionally, especially what has been happening in recent weeks in the United States, you may have heard of the Black Lives Matter movement. And this has affected a lot of people who are not Black, who are not of African origins. It has also affected a lot of South Asians, whether they are Muslims, Hindus, Jains, Christians, etc. And it has affected a lot of Khojas. And they are reassessing their own position, not only in Canada or the United States or Britain, but also the Khojas who are living in East Africa, whose parents were living in East Africa, parents and grandparents. They are saying, why did our forefathers, our ancestors, our parents treat Africans in a discriminatory way? So these are the questions that they are asking. And these are difficult questions for the community. And it is something, obviously, a discussion that comes out of the notion of pluralism. If you really believe in pluralism, you have to ask these hard questions. So in terms of the challenges that this diaspora is facing, externally, the kind of questions they're asking themselves is, how should Khojas engage with other peoples? That means other Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jews, atheists, etc. What sort of relationships do they want to have with them? How should they engage with them, culturally, religiously, etc.? And then the internal questions, the internal challenges. How do diasporic Western communities, Khoja communities, operate on an equitable basis with those Khojas who are in Asia and Africa? Because these are those people who are living in Western communities, in the Western diaspora. They are more privileged. They have more access to resources, better education, etc. How do they operate transnationally in an equitable basis with other people of their own community? Secondly, how do Khojas as a whole share power with other Ismailis from Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, etc.? Because they have become the most successful, they have wealth, They have economic power, they have political power in the community. They are the ones who are leading the major institutions of the Aga Khan Development Network. How do they enable their co-religionists to rise up as well? And finally, how does this transnational religious group come to terms with the inherent pluralism of Satpanth? Satpanth is a very unique aspect in this religion. Of course, it shares the same kind of broad-mindedness with the Kabir Panth and the Sikh Panth and so on, with the Nanak Panth. What does Satpanth have to offer, not only to Ismailis, Islam, but also to other people, Hindus and others, and enable people to see what is possible with hybridity, with people coming together, with people not being completely closed in their own faiths, in their own cultures, but interacting with each other. What can we learn from this? So these are the issues that I would like to leave you with. I don't think you can see these pictures probably, but the picture is a very interesting picture of an Aga Khan school in Mundra, which was in Kutch, Gujarat, which was established in 1905, where people of young children of Gujarati background are reading at a library. Then there's a picture of the Aga Khan Academy in Nairobi, of an African girl and other children of Indian background, Khoja background most likely, interacting with each other. And then there is a picture of the Aga Khan Boy Scouts in Canada with children, Boy Scouts of Khoja background, working together with an Ismaili of Afghan background. So this is what I have to say, and I hope that it was useful for you. I'm happy to take questions if there is time.
Thank you so much, sir, for elaborative outlining the entire process of Gujarati diaspora and a very brief, very elaborative your focus on this Khoja community, and also how best the Indians have moved outward. So, am I audible now?
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you. I think I can hear you.
Now, because it's been 1 hour and Professor Karim is in the early morning.
I think there is a sharing slide which is on the video.
So slides is, it's over now. So now I think the floor is open. If anybody has any questions or clarifications in mind, please do ask. And don't miss out this opportunity, but be very brief because it's very early morning in Canada, and perhaps I don't know whether he has done his morning work and all. So please, very briefly, we can just take up some questions. Thank you. Please. Anybody wants to ask questions, please unmute, then ask the questions.
Sir, sorry for interview, sir. Sir, please tell him to Mr. Dr. Karim, sir. Sir, please stop your sharing, sir. Please, sir.
Professor Karim, please stop sharing sharing this because your screen is being shared with us now.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
So please, anybody please ask any questions. Do you have any questions, audience, please? Well, so I think Dr. Sujauddin, please wind up. And because it's so elaborative, so I think it's a very, as a classroom, we have been listening to him. Yeah, Dr. Naresh, you want to ask question? Please do ask.
Yes, sir. Sir, I want to ask. Hello, can you listen to me, sir?
Yeah.
Yes. Please go ahead.
Yeah. And thank you, Professor Karim, sir. Actually, you have your lecture is very thought-provoking. Touch so many ideas, especially the conceptual clarity about the migration hybridity and this identity issue, not only in the case of Hindu or Muslim diaspora, even other some marginal communities, those actually which are not generally advocated in the literature. So, sir, actually, my question, not a question, just I want to know your some brief comments on two specific questions. So actually, we have a diversity in terms of various composition, like in social composition of the diasporic population across. Somehow you have touched about this double diaspora or double migration, particularly from the East African countries to European countries, even the USA or Eastern European countries or Western European countries or other parts of the world. From the India, those who have a double diaspora or double migration. And just I want to know about that. You have argued in the case studies about the Khoja communities and Roma diaspora and other diaspora. So there are various type of organization has been developed across the countries, particularly in European country and this Americas. So that is based on the certain social categories. And like some, like we have a Gujarati diaspora, Kerala, Gujarati diaspora, Malayali diaspora, Odia diaspora. So that is actually much more what I personally think that is much more based on the regional identity rather than this this unique identity as an Indianness. But that is actually somehow what I have seen that they have not in the every level they have actually whenever India faces a crisis they come together and solve so many issues in terms of as an Indianness. But somehow we are looking that the political actually conflict or maybe political issues and they are looking much more forward to looking their own particular community rather than as a general community as an Indianness. So like we have a actually we have a in terms of diversity, like some people are very rich, most people are very moderate or low income groups because they don't have a voice, they don't have a social capital, they don't have a actually social connection or strong connections. So how do you see this kind of problem in terms of diaspora in across the countries? Sir, you have a vast experience. So just I want to know your comments, sir.
Thank you, Nareshji. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I think there were two streams of thought there. One in terms of class, the economic advantage and disadvantage, and the other in terms of regional and national identity. So let's take the regional and national identity first. Yes, because one of the things that binds people is language. So when they move to another part of the world, they will look for people who speak their own language. They will try to establish a radio program or a television program, or they will interact through the internet, through various means using that language. And they will gather together to perform cultural or religious activities using that language. So this is almost, dare I say, a natural occurrence in diaspora in which people come together around those social characteristics. On the other hand, there is a certain national identity as well. It doesn't disappear. And as you said, during times of crisis or whatever in the homeland, people will come together. There are certain organizations which are have a national identity, which will try and mobilize people on that basis. So it operates at different levels. And when you're talking about large numbers of people, people will basically, fragment in terms of their different identities. But then when I was doing a focus group once, and I brought various South Asians together to talk about their ethnic media, and I was doing this in Montreal, and one of the people who was a Punjabi from Pakistan, he said he was initially, when he came to Canada, he was so fed up of being alone and not being able to speak his language So once it happened that he saw on the other side of the street when he was walking in the city, a sick man. And so this man crossed the street and went to talk to him. He never met this man before, and said, I wanted to speak to him in Punjabi because he hadn't had an opportunity to do this for a very long time. So whether it was, a cultural barriers, national barriers, religious barriers, they were all overcome because of language. So it works in different ways. And we need to understand, there's also the factor of loneliness of people in diaspora, where communities are not formed. People want to interact with people of their kind. So whether it is culture, language, religion, people come together, and sometimes these things overlap, sometimes they do not. So it's important to understand those aspects. The other thing is with issues of class. And here, yes, people often forget, sometimes the term model minority is used in America, in Canada, and Britain, and so on for Indians. And the young people are really reacting to that. They're saying there are a lot of people who are not doing very well. There are a lot of problems that people face with respect to their livelihood. They're finding it difficult to find a job, fail in business, etc. And those people often get ignored by the leadership of those communities. Some of them are trying, some of them are not. And so this is something that is written out of the dominant discourses of communities. People who are not doing well, they don't have good clothes, they do not even want to interact in community gatherings because they feel ashamed to be there with their fellows. So they stay away from the community, the diasporic community, and this is a very sad situation. So those are two important points that you have brought up.
Yeah. Can I ask, sir, another one important actually question?
Actually, in fact,
I will give opportunity to another student. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, please.
I think Professor
no
Khadria wants to have some
No,
comments.
you go ahead first. You go ahead.
Because we are running short of time, so we can just take only two questions, one from Professor Khadir Vinodji and also one from among the student. Or
Let the student ask first, and then I will just have a brief one at the end.
So who is asking questions among the students who have joined, please?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's his name? Mr. Sajid.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much, everyone.
Then next is one, just a minute, hold on. Next is anybody in the student or anybody? Who is this? Anybody wants to ask questions, please?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question, please.
Huh?
I would like to ask a question, yeah, Jamil.
Jamil?
Yeah.
Okay, right, so two questions, and finally then we'll have a comment or questions from Professor Vinod Khadiria. So we'll take up only three questions. Thank you so much. Please go on.
Thank you so much, Doctor. First of all, I would like to say I'm Mohammad Sajid Khan. I'm studying PhD in Hacettepe University in Turkey. And thank you so much for this beautiful session. It was really an insightful one. And my questions to Professor Karim is that, as I see, your presentation was more about adaptation than integration. So I don't know, maybe you are referring to integration, like referring to adaptation, you means integration. Because I'm studying social integration in Syrian, Afghan, and Somali refugees in Turkey, and there are a lot in Turkey. So I just wanted to ask you, like, how do you see the adaptation is more easy? Because I don't see adaptation and integration in the same meaning, So do you see adaptation is more which is very, how can I say, temporary, and integration is more like a long-term process? So do you see these process in a different way? And also, do you see these what kind of dissimilarities do you see in these kind of processes? Because normally Indians are seen as more adaptive because of our cultural influence, because of our tolerance ability. But if we compare it to the other countries like Somalia or Syria, the integration and adaptation are very less. So how do you evaluate all these two terms?
All right, so it's taken, please. I think we can take all three questions, then you can answer in it at one go. Second question by the student, Mr. Jameen.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this chance. I am Jamil Ahmed from Yemen, doing PhD here in India. My question is about assimilation. How assimilation is, usually assimilation incorporates or signals an absorption into the mainstream society or the general society. And I have read some articles or some books about diaspora, and they highlight the hyphen, the issues or the crisis in hyphen. Yeah, which means hyphenation of identity. And you also highlighted points of hybridity, religious hybridity, and also some aspects of cultural hybridity. Then how can cultural difference be incorporated in hybridity?
All right, taken. The question is taken now. So Professor Kadri is.
Yeah, I think the earlier two questions are interrelated, and so is mine. I think I missed the first part of Professor Karim's presentation. I was late in joining, but when I joined in, I heard him speaking about assimilation, and that's also being raised by the other two questions. He didn't mention, I didn't get at least adaptation. He mentioned assimilation, and then this is the, I mean, the other term that is being referred to is integration. So the terminology has moved from assimilation, like from melting pot to salad bowl. You know, that kind of an approach. That in that context, it is my curiosity, and perhaps you can address that. I see that the Gujarati community is a well-knit community amongst themselves. You know, when you look at the Gujarati diaspora, if a new member comes, the existing diaspora would put in everything to support them, to give them, you know, all kinds of. So from that point of view, they are very integrated. How about their external barriers? How can they become, in your terms, say assimilation, or in the other term integration? Whether they are open to this or not.
Thank you, sir. So now, Professor Karim, please, because these three questions will be answered finally, so then we will wind up because it's been very late, and we have to be kind enough to Professor Karim, because in the very early morning he has joined with us. So please, Professor Karim, go on. Answer all three questions, then we'll wind up.
Okay, these are very obviously quite interrelated, the questions. So thank you for that. And it certainly shows, you know, what the participants' concerns are, intellectual concerns, and they overlap. So with respect to adaptation, integration, assimilation, and let me. There was also the question about hyphenation of identity and cultural difference, hybridity. But let me start with integration and assimilation. So I generally, in my presentations, in my writing, have not used the word adaptation, but for this particular presentation, I thought it was appropriate. Assimilation, when American scholars write and they speak, they largely use the word assimilation because their classic model is that of the melting pot, that everyone comes to America, and they all become American, and it is a melting pot that everyone has contributed something of their previous culture into American culture. I hope my American friends don't get upset at me, but I think that is a myth. It rarely happens that everyone loses their own previous culture and becomes part of this unique American culture. I lived, you know, when I was doing my undergraduate work in New York, I lived there for 4 years, and I saw so many different peoples celebrating their own culture, having their own particular ways of living. Of course, they were living together in one city. And of course, America is a large country, and they found a way to interact with each other. But the identities, the cultural, ethnic identities of peoples remain. So let's move on to integration. And the idea of the salad bowl was mentioned, which is, I think, a very a Canadian term, which another term which is also used is a mosaic. Now, in which so when you think of a salad, it's not a melting pot. Everything is not cooked, together. The ingredients maintain their own integrity. So whether it is lettuce or tomatoes or cucumbers or carrots or whatever, they remain what they are. And the salad bowl is consumed with all these things remaining in their own with their own integrity. So that is the notion that Canada and some other countries have tried to adopt through multiculturalism. Excuse me. And that the people come with their own cultures and retain their cultures, but are part of the new nation. So the nation has a particular identity, but the identity of all the others are recognized. So when multiculturalism policy was announced by the Prime Minister in 1971, Pierre Trudeau, the father of the current Prime Minister, he said, there is no official culture in Canada. It is multicultural, but there are two official languages, English and French. Now, just as I said, the melting pot theory is a kind of a myth. Integration, multiculturalism also rests on certain myths and ideologies. There is not the assumption that there is everyone's culture has an equal chance of operating in the new country is not necessarily true. And by saying that two languages are dominant, well, the cultures are tied to a large extent to those languages. And so the two dominant groups, the British and the French, their culture will remain dominant. And there is a lot of discussion in this country, in Canada, about the rights of the indigenous people, or some of them are called the First Nations, that they were here first, and that their culture is not recognized, or at least not given its due. And there are other peoples who have been here for a very long time as well. And so it's an ongoing debate and discussion, but there are some differences with the idea of assimilation, which is an idea of a complete absorption into a national culture, and then of integration with respect to engaging with the national culture, but retaining your own culture. Now, I did not use the word integration, also because it has become highly politicized in Europe. And a lot of people a lot of activists, anti-racist activists, see integration in much more or less the same way as assimilation. And they respond to it very negatively. That's why I stayed away from the word integration. But in my writings, I've often used that term in the way that I explained. Now, adaptation, of course, is a means towards integration because it asks of the culture that arrives to change some of its aspects, to be able to work effectively in the new social and cultural environment. One could also say for economic success, to have a livelihood, to be able to operate in a workplace effectively, you have to know the local culture. You have to know how people greet each other, what sort of banter they engage in, etc., so that you do not feel completely out of place. And you may even not be hired the next time because you're not able to be to engage in socialities like that. So these are generally my takes on assimilation, integration, and adaptation. And then there was the idea of hybridity with respect to cultural difference. So hybridity occurs, there is no one formula for hybridity. It occurs in so many different ways when two different cultures or three different cultures or more come together, and either all of these cultures or some of these cultures, and of course there are power relationships, which are the more powerful cultures in that society. So in my country, in Canada, of course, the British culture is very powerful. The French culture, it depends on which part of the country you live. I live in the capital, which tries to be both French and English, but the French is a little bit lower In Quebec, of course, it's very powerful. And so the various hybridities, and I can put this in plural, that will develop in different parts of the country, depending on the different social interactions between different groups, will have different manifestations. But the idea is that something new will emerge, which is not completely what it was before. So I will, after all my family's travels over the last 100 years, from Gujarat to East Africa and then I went to United States and Canada, and then I lived in Britain and so on. So I am not the person that would have been if my family had remained in Gujarat. I have absorbed a lot of cultural influences from Africa, where I was born and grew up until 18. And then I went to North America and to Europe. And so there are things that I may not even be conscious of that I have absorbed. So just to give you an example, I had lived in North America for about 5 or 6 years. And then I went to study in England. And when I was trying to buy a suitcase after I was ending my trip to Britain and going back to Canada, I was interacting with another Indian who was at the shop. He was the owner of the suitcase shop, and he asked me if I was from America. I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Your accent." I hadn't realized that after living in North America for 6 years, my accent had changed from what I had grown up in Africa, which was already not the same accent that it would have been if I grew up in Gujarat. In Africa, it had been influenced by my British teachers and my Indian teachers. And then I went to America to university and lived there, and then in Canada, and again my accent changed. So these are examples that I'm giving to you with respect to the hybridity of even how one talks, but then even how one thinks, one's culture. But still, there are aspects of me which are Gujarati. So certain things have not changed, which from my ancestors, which I have kept. My children, perhaps they grew up in Canada, they were born in Canada. They are less Gujarati than perhaps I am. But then there are different modalities. My son spent a lot of time in India. He was a diplomat there. And he's very interested in Indian culture. My younger son is less so. So different things will happen even within the family. So hybridity can occur in multifarious ways. And the last issue was that of hyphenated identity. So this has appeared in many debates in Canada and in elsewhere. So I have so many hyphenations. I could be a Khoja Canadian, I could be an Indian Canadian, I could be a South Asian Canadian, I could be a Muslim Canadian, etc. And there are people who are saying on the other side that you have not become a Canadian, you're still hanging on to that other part of your identity or identities. You should be a full Canadian. Well, when you try to engage with them in that way, they will always say, you are Indian. They will forget the Canadian part. So when people, other people, let's say of European backgrounds in Canada are interacting with you, they will identify you with your skin color and your other characteristics as only belonging to another part of the world. They will not attach the Canadian to you. So by saying that I'm Indian Canadian, I am claiming both my ancestral origin and my current nationality. So the hyphen can be a very powerful thing, but there are many critiques of it. So this is basically what I have to say about these questions. I hope I was able to answer you.
Thank you so much, sir. So now I would request Mr. Sujauddin to please propose a vote of thanks, then we'll wind up because it's already been 1.5 hours. So please go on.
Sure.
So please wind up quickly.
Sir, Sir, Anshuman wants to say something. Should we allow him? Anshuman, can you quickly ask what you want to say?
I think his microphone is not on.
Anshuman, please speak. Anshuman? Can you turn on your mic and speak? Yes, you are audible now. Yeah. Say. I think there is a problem, sir.
I think you can wind up now. So it's
Thank you.
Please.
Sorry, I could not hear you, Anshuman.
Please give word of thanks and then we'll wind up. Huh?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Can I just add a small thing to it, because we are in a COVID-19 situation, and then we are talking about diaspora. It's just a curiosity. I want to know that how people are helping each other in this pandemic situation. When we are talking about Indian diaspora, American diaspora, African diaspora, I mean, how are they helping each other to come out of this pandemic situation? Can you just throw a bit of light on this?
Certainly. So, of course, different communities are dealing with it in different way, but I will just speak from the experience of the Khoja diaspora. What has been happening with respect to the use of media is just amazing. So the internet has been embraced in a significant way, but also the telephone. So my mother, who is 86 years old, who doesn't know how to use the internet, there is programming for her in which she is able to participate just the way that we are participating together back and forth interactively. People to come together to not only talk about the disease, but about other issues as well, and to share ways of prevention, of coping with the problems, and not only with the disease itself, but the social isolation that occurs, the mental health issues, and other issues. So it's interesting that at least how one diaspora has been able to sort of use the technologies to engage with different parts of their group internationally.
Thank you, Professor Karim. Thank you for.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Professor Karim, and thank you so much, Dr. Lakshmi Kumar Mahapatra, Chairperson of Center for Diaspora Studies. Sir, it was really enriching session and enlightening. You have both personal as well as scholarly experiences in this field of diaspora, and we are really in debt to you, sir. It was really informative, and the personal touch that you have given us more diverse understanding of diaspora. Sir, just to inform you that this workshop was a 3 days workshop, and we received applications from more than 70 countries and 1,700 universities across the part of the world, and there were more than 3,000 applications, sir. And we had to extend our platform to Facebook also. There are many Facebook participants who are watching, and I'm really thankful to you. And I'm also thankful to the other scholars, those who delivered their wonderful insights and critical deliberations on the various aspects of migration and diaspora studies and its research component, how it should be done, and what are the challenges, and how students of this field should overcome from those challenges. I am really thankful to the scholars from Oxford, Columbia, Humboldt, Carleton, Murdoch University, University of East London, Raparin University, JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University. We have Professor Khadria here, who is from Jawaharlal University. Professor Georgia Dona is also with us today in this session, and Professor Ramisur Rahman that you were discussing from Jamia Millia Islamia. We had professors from University of Hyderabad, Central University of Gujarat, IIPS, CDS, VIT, and Wellinger Institute. Sir, it's really a historical day for us that we could collaborate with an international university, and we could attract the international attention. After seeing this response, sir, we could see that there is a huge interest in diaspora and migration studies. We have scholars from different parts of the world. So what we have planned is to launch a virtual platform, Global Association for Migration and Diaspora Studies, under the guidance of our senior scholars like you, for the young minds that we have received applications of 3,000 scholars. So we will work on it, sir, and we'll circulate it. Your guidance and your cooperation would be highly appreciated. And I hope this workshop, which we plan to engage and retrain and reorient our scholars of migration and diaspora studies, not only from Center for Diaspora Studies, but across the world. I hope all scholars enjoyed all the sessions and they had fruitful discussions. And we could able to achieve our goal of continuing learning and research amidst the difficult time of COVID-19. And of course, along with COVID-19, there were many other challenges like technical difficulties. But thankfully, we overcome from them and we had successfully organized this workshop. I once again thank our collaborator, Center for Refugee Migration and Belonging, University of East London, and Professor. And personal thanks to Professor Dona for leading this whole cooperation and support. Yes, and we were also planning to publish all the lectures that were delivered here, sir. No lecture was, all lectures had a wonderful quality that those lectures are required for our young students. So keeping that in mind, we have planned to receive the revised chapters, and we are planning to publish in a book form, sir. Thank you so much, everybody. And once again, I thank everyone, including our Vice Chancellor, Registrar, my Center for, and CMRB from UEL, and all participants, all distinguished scholars, chairs, assistants, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And I wish you all good health and wonderful academic career ahead. Thank you so much, Professor Karim, once again for joining with us. With this, I think I should close the session, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
I would just like to say that it was a real honor and a real pleasure to interact with you all. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Very nice.